Pigweed here. Today we review an IPA and discuss an American novella from the 1940s. Hello and welcome to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crow Hill. Good evening, Crow Hill.
Good evening, Pigweed. Oh, there we got another cheer.
Oh, what is on your mind?
Well, Doc, Dora, Mack, and Lee Chong.
Lee Chong. I see. It must be time for P&C's shortcut to the classics.
That's exactly right, where we read a great book from some of the world's great authors, provided it isn't too long.
Yeah, not too long. This one comes in under 200 pages, and it is, drum roll, Cannery Row by John Steinbeck.
Cannery Row.
Yes, and there's some beer drinking going on in this
There's a lot
novel.
of beer drinking going on in this novel.
Let's look at this beer we have before us.
Although they call it a novella, how do you decide if it's a novella or a novel?
Yeah, I would say under 200.
Yeah, maybe.
Something like that.
Yeah.
You know, I think more than if you can read it in one afternoon, it's a novella.
Okay. So what do we got here?
So, Union Brewery in Baltimore makes a Steady Eddy IPA, named after not Eddie Van Halen, but
Eddie Murray.
Eddie Murray. Thank you. And it's really good. They give the ingredients. Of course, they don't tell you
Proportions, right?
Yeah. So it's two-row wheat and honey malt.
Uh-huh.
And I thought while I was choosing it, I had a choice between white wheat and red wheat. I was hoping to get some orange by choosing the red wheat.
Yeah, it's a touch of orange.
So I think it's a little more orangey than gold, anyway. And the whatever hops they said, and of course my own schedule, and lovely.
Well, I like it.
Yeah, I think it has a delightful hop bitterness to it. I'm not getting a huge amount of hop aroma.
No, I didn't do any. I think whatever leftover hops I threw in, the flame out, something like that. I didn't dry hop it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
really good balance between the maltiness and the bitterness there. Nice color, good carbonation. All right.
All right. Well, that's a keeper. That's gonna be.
It's a hit. Ha ha. That's a joke.
That's what last two. Yeah, if we had the can here, I could tell you how many hits you had.
Yeah.
I was going to call it a home run, but you beat me to it.
Good. Oh, and there's Longinus.
There you go. Yes, Longinus. Thank you for joining us today.
He's always here as our literary contributor. Now,
and Longinus picked this book.
Yes, he did.
Yes,
he did. And I'm going to ask him about that later. So, I'd like to just go through the events of the book, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about things like tone and protagonist.
Do you want to do a quick bio on him, or?
Oh, I do. I do want to hear some facts on John Steinbeck.
Some quickie.
Yeah. Give me some.
Born in 1902 in Salina, California. Graduated high school and attended Stanford University, but did not graduate.
That's a pattern.
Another of our authors who did not graduate college. How many have we done? Most of them.
Right. Yeah. I always like to say that he worked a bunch of odd jobs. Farms and ranches when he was a kid, lettuce farms and things like that. Construction, journalism. And he was a winter caretaker at the Tahoe estate in Tahoe.
Okay.
And that's where he actually wrote his first draft of his first novel,
From what I
The
understand,
Cup of Gold.
on all these jobs, he was like carrying around a notebook and jotting down stories and things.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, he knew from a very early age he wanted to be a writer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just, get your MFA in creative writing, having never experienced life, and be a writer.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Or you would write one of those books about being somebody who wants to be a writer and you're in academia, and that doesn't go too far. There's too many of those anyway.
No, you need your Jack Londons and your Melvilles and your, guys,
right.
Get out there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead.
1929, he publishes Cup of Gold. That's his first one. Doesn't go very well. Mm-hmm. Does a couple more. 1930, he marries. Goes to L.A. for a few months. That doesn't work out. The money runs out. He moves to Pacific Grove on the Monterey Peninsula, which was owned by his dad. And so his dad sort of helped him out, too. And that's where he wrote and finally published published 4 novels, which is the one that became most successful and put him on the map was Tortilla Flat.
Uh-huh.
And then he comes to his greats, I think we would say, Of Mice and Men, I think is,
Right.
we could have read that as the shortcut, but everybody read that already.
Right.
And then Grapes of Wrath in 1939,
Biggies.
which is absolutely incredible. So he lived in the Pacific Grove area to the 30s until he went to World War II. World War II becomes a war correspondent. So he's out there. He's in Africa and Italy and
Apparently,
Norway.
he was a war correspondent with a gun.
With a gun, right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he would actually help guard, it'd be like in the machine gun.
Yeah.
Right,
You know,
right, but
man.
you have to take off your press pass off of your uniform, right? Remember
Something
that?
like that,
Yeah,
right.
it's like, all right, if you're gonna strap on a gun, all right, now take off my press pass. Not that
But I would-
rules of war matter really, but
Yeah.
Yeah. When he was living in Monterey, he met Ed Ricketts.
Okay.
And that's somebody we'll talk about a little bit later on. And also a guy named Joseph Campbell decided to go out there and spend a couple years out there. So
did Joseph
it's
Campbell
very-
hit on his wife?
I think they may
Somebody
have had an affair.
No, she did. She did have an affair, and they got divorced. But I don't remember. I don't think it was Joseph Campbell. I don't know who it was.
I think he was accused of being.
Okay.
Well, in Joseph Campbell's biography, it talks about Joseph and his wife being really, really good friends. Yeah. So,
whether or not across the
All right,
line,
there
I'm
we go.
not to say.
So he finally moves to like New York around after 41, and then he goes to war and he comes back, and he's in the New York area ever since then. 52, he writes East of Eden. 59, he actually spends like a year in England and he has a couple of books out about the King Arthur and the Round Tables,
right.
Tales, which he might have, well, as a kid, they say, as a kid, he was very influenced and loved them. But Joseph Campbell, I mean, that's what he wrote his master's degree on.
There you go.
So, in 1962, he wins the Nobel Prize for Literature. That's also the same time he publishes Travels with Charlie. I don't know if you ever read that. Charlie's a poodle dog, and he gets in a pickup truck, a little camper, and drives around the country. And then finally dies in
And
68.
apparently on that trip, his son wanted to go with him, but he wouldn't let his son.
Yeah.
wouldn't let his son
Dad,
go.
this would be so awesome. Yeah.
Take
that's
the
all right.
poodle. Take the poodle.
I'll
not
take-
the son.
Take Charlie.
The poodle doesn't talk back, right? You don't have to ask the poodle for, like, should we do this or that?
Yeah, I guess.
All right, so to go through the book, there's a series of vignettes. It's almost hard to say that there is a continuous plot, and there's so many side characters and stuff that I'm afraid we're going to get bogged down if we cover everybody. So let's just, the one thing that drives the plot through, we'll do that, and then at the end, if you have any side stories or side characters that we did not mention, we'll circle back on that, and it would be also we'll find out. It starts off with Lee Chong's everything store.
Yeah, he's the quintessential Chinese grocer
Yeah.
who has packed into some small place everything you could possibly want.
Yes.
He's got liquor, he's got clothes, he's got
Fishing lures, whatever.
Anything that
Everything
you
you
want is in this store.
And everybody owes him money,
Yes.
and he extends credit until he cuts you off.
Yes.
And that's an early scene, right? And so the book is very light, but it does start with a suicide. So
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, so a guy comes in, I forget his name, and he owns this building up the street where Lee Chong is storing some
Fish meal.
fish meal,
yeah.
okay, right? And he wants to settle his debts because he doesn't want his wife and child shackled with his debts when he dies. So he sells him the building and then goes off and kills himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
Yeah.
there's a group of guys out there,
Mack and the boys.
which were called Mack and the Boys, and they got their eye on the
Well, they'd
on
been
that
living.
building.
They'd been living in pipes and
Under trees
under
and-
trees and
yep.
whatnot, and they wanted someplace more stable. So they go and negotiate with Lee Chong to say, it'd be a terrible thing if like all the windows got broken in that building and
It's a little bit of a protection racket.
somebody burned it down or something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it'd probably be better if you had us living there.
So, right, so I love it. So they negotiate over a price that both of them know
Nobody's going to pay.
nobody's ever going to pay. So he says $5 a month, and they try to bargain it down to $4, and Lee won't move, knowing he's never going to get it.
Right.
Yeah.
So this,
It's
But right.
negotiating with pretend money.
yes.
But Lee Chong knows very well that he will actually save and make more money with Mack and the boys living in that building, because the Mack and the boys are not going to be stealing from the
They
benefactor.
won't be stealing from him, and they'll
And
be,
any money that they do come across.
they'll be
Right.
buying stuff from him. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, there is better than having somebody living there with your fish meal anyway. And it's the, what is it? The Palace Flop House.
Yes.
It becomes the Palace Flop House. And,
Later, the Palace Flop House and Grill.
and yes, later on it becomes the grill. So then the next most important character, I guess we've got Lee Chong, Mack and the boys, and Doc.
Doc.
So
Yes. So Doc is a very smart guy. He's probably the only person in the town or in Cannery Row who's gone to college.
yes.
He
Didn't
has-
finish college, but gone to college.
Yeah, he has nice tastes. He listens to classical music on his phonograph. He is a marine biologist.
At Western Ecological.
Yeah, and he has a broad knowledge of medicine, and is basically called on by anybody in the area when there's a problem, either a human or an animal.
Yeah, even
Needs
though he
help.
doesn't have any training in medicine of any
But
kind,
he's the guy who knows things.
he's the guy, and everybody loves it, respects him, and he loves his beer. And so the lay of the land here, you've got the road, you've got all the canneries,
Yeah.
which don't really play that much
No.
of a.
Yeah, they don't get much. They get a little bit of a mention that when the canneries are running, people get work and they get money, and when they're not, they don't. And that's basically all.
It's either boom or bust, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that goes back to the theme, which we'll talk about afterward.
Yes, and so you really have Lee Chong's Grocery, the Western Ecological, which is the Doc's.
He sells specimens.
Yes.
Yeah, for scientific
People come in with
research, right?
orders, and right, they say, "Well, I need some squids
right.
and some frogs, and
Yeah,
for
and
dissecting or whatever."
Yeah.
So
a school superintendent needs 400 starfish for the high school biology in
Yeah.
his county.
Yeah.
So they call on Doc, and he goes out and finds them and ships them to him.
all right, then there's La Ida Bar, and then there's the Bear Flag Restaurant slash
whorehouse. That's
slash whorehouse.
Yeah,
So-
and last time we talked about, every good book has a good whorehouse in it, right?
Where you get
Or
good
how many
whorehouse anymore?
shortcuts to the classics have we read that had a good whorehouse in it? We should.
That's a good point.
They seem
We
to have
should
been
put
more
that.
popular in the old days. But about
Right.
Doc, I love this quote about Doc. He can kill anything for need, but he would not even hurt a feeling for pleasure.
That is, see, that
Yeah.
that does sound like Doc.
Yeah, so he was a very kind man. He would help anybody, and when somebody needed $1, he'd give him $1.
Right.
And so he's a very good man.
Yes. So we've got Mack and the boys now have a place to live.
Right.
They are, ne'er-do-wells who
it's
don't
kinda
really
hard.
want a job.
It's kind of hard to characterize them.
I wouldn't say never do wells, but ne'er do wells is better.
Yeah.
Near do wells, yeah.
Well, they seem almost cursed in their inability to get anything right.
Yes.
It's almost like they have a good heart, but they just can't quite bring themselves to do something correctly.
And so
Well,
it's-
I would say that, but looking from another perspective, they do everything right.
Okay, well, we'll see about
Well,
that.
we'll get that. We'll get that because that's kind of in the opening quote of the
Yep.
of the book.
Yeah.
We'll come back. So here we have like the driving motivation of the closest thing we have to a plot is that these good-natured misfits
Yeah.
recognize that Doc is a swell guy,
Right.
and you know what we ought to do?
Give them a party.
Give him a party.
Right.
Problem is, none of us have any money.
Right.
Or a place really to.
So they're going to throw the party at Doc's place.
Doc's house.
But they still need some money, and
Right.
but Doc is they
Constantly in need
of frogs.
Yeah.
5 cents a frog.
Yeah.
And if we can get enough frogs, that's enough money for to pay for party supplies.
Yes.
And so begins,
the comedy of errors.
And the series of obstacles.
Yes.
And then
so let's think about the obstacles. They want to get all these frogs.
Right. Now they need a car.
Yeah, they need a car to get out to the place to get the frogs. They don't have a car. And they can't get Doc's car because he's going down south to get some other creature. I can't remember what it is.
A small octopi.
Okay, right. So they go to Lee Chong. And Lee Chong has a car, but it doesn't work.
Right.
But Gay, who's one of the boys, is a gifted mechanic. I think I got a good quote about his talent.
Yes, they rely on. They figure. We'll get the car. Lee Chong is like, well, he probably got it in some sort of barter.
Yeah.
It's no good to him that it doesn't run. He doesn't have to give them money for gas.
Because Doc is going to give them. They go through this whole thing. We need to get there. Okay, we need a car. We got a car, but we don't have any gas. They go to Doc to get the gas.
Yeah, and go to Lee Chong to borrow $10 that they'll pay back once they get the frogs.
Right.
Chong's not going for it.
And then, and then they go. They finally get the truck. They finally get it working.
Yeah. Let me read this quote about Gay was an inspired mechanic. There is no term comparable to green thumbs to apply to such a mechanic, but there should be. For there are men who can look, listen, tap, make an adjustment, and a machine works. Indeed, there are men near whom a car runs better, and such a one was Gay.
Very good, yes. Now he does get it running, and they do go up to get the gas, and how do they get the gas?
So Doc has given them a
$10 credit.
$10 credit, and
it's almost like a hall pass, right?
Yeah. It's not. So they go and they say, "Why don't you just put in 5 gallons and we'll take the $5?" And they're like, "Doc figured you would say that."
Right.
Doc's up to their tricks. So and
then they say, "All right, put 5 gallons in the tank and give us a 5-gallon."
In a sealed container, right?
In a container.
Right. And they're like, Doc thought you'd say that too. Yes, they have to put all 10 gallons in the tank. And then they find out, despite Gay's excellent repairs, that the car only goes uphill in reverse.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, one good gear.
Yeah.
It was in reverse.
Yeah, and Gabe figures that out because I guess the straps that...
Yeah, so he kind of even knew, he figured that was going to happen. And when it got to a hill, he figured the best way to do this is to go backwards. Yeah. But then the carburetor gives out.
Yeah, but it wasn't the whole carburetor. It was the needle valve in the carburetor. So he goes off to get a new needle valve.
Right.
Well, and it would. I mean, how long did it take?
And they said, they said, and we didn't see him for 180 days.
And through some strange, we can talk about that later. This strange collection of he goes off to get the valve. It's gone.
Right. Yeah, he goes out to get the valve. He gets picked up by a guy. His car breaks down. Guy fixes it. The guy's so grateful. Takes him out for a drink. And then from there it gets involved, right?
Ends up in jail.
And it gets worse and worse.
Well, one of the other guys goes out and steals the carburetor.
Just takes the whole carburetor.
Takes the whole carburetor, replaces the carburetor. They get the car running again. So now they're out there trying to get the frogs, and they run into a problem because the landowner comes up and says,
"Yes, the captain."
Yeah,
the captain, right?
Says,
I love it.
Didn't you see the no trespassing signs?
No.
And no, of course they didn't see the trespassing. So.
But here you see Mack's skills.
Mack is quite the wheedler. He's really good at figuring out how to play off somebody. So he notices that the dog has an infection or something, and he just works the captain like nothing, and says he'll make a poultice for the dog to make him feel better. And they end up going up to the captain's house, and the captain says, there's a whole lot of frogs in that pond that keep me up at night. Why don't you get those?
And he just so happened to have a cask of bootleg bourbon.
Corn whiskey,
in the basement that he...
From the First War, so it's been aged properly.
Yeah. So they all get good and hammered.
There's a lot of talk about having a short one.
Exactly. Right. They're just going to have like a little sip, and then they're like, yeah, you know what? If we just poured it into a pitcher, it'd be easier. So now the short was just turned into a gallon of booze.
That's
Right.
Then they finally get around to going, weren't we supposed to get frogs? So they do catch a heck of a lot. They catch.
Well, they take a completely. There's this long section where he talks about in the history of men and frogs. There's the normal way of getting frogs. You use a bow, you use a gun, you use a net, you use
man and frog know how this thing is going to go,
and the frogs are okay with that.
But not with Mack and the boys.
But not with Mack. They take a completely different approach. They basically all charge into the pond and stir up the frogs and push them en masse,
flush them out
across the pond up the other side, where guys are waiting with flashlights, where they basically.
They didn't see that one coming.
Apparently, if you put a flashlight in a frog's eyes, it'll stand still. Right. And then they just pick them up like berries off the ground, throw them in the sacks, and they come up with hundreds and hundreds of frogs.
So they get their hundreds and hundreds of frogs.
And then they go back to the captain's house, and they keep on having a reverie, and they love it, and then finally sneak out when the captain's like passed out on the floor. And the reason they sneak out because they're like, well, if we're here, he's going to get in trouble because his wife's going to come home and see us in here, and she's going to get mad at that. So we'll just sneak out so he doesn't get in trouble.
He'll still get in trouble for being drunk on the floor, but
but not as bad.
A bunch of misfits.
Yeah.
So now they have frogs, which are the equivalent of money.
Yeah.
But they're not quite money.
No, they're as good as money. In Cannery Row, they're as good as money because Doc basically has a standing offer of 5 cents per frog.
And everybody knows it.
Yeah.
So including Mr.
The
Chong.
whole point of all this was to raise money so that they could buy stuff to have a party for Doc.
So they get Lee Chong, who doesn't really want the frogs, but the frogs become currency.
Yes, because Lee Chong knows as well as they do that there's a standing offer of 5 cents per frog. So they end up trading with Lee Chong with the frogs.
And the prices of things keep going up.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do?
Right. It's not 2 frogs. It's 4 frogs.
Yeah. And at the same time, they're buying whiskey, they're buying wine, and they happen to be drinking it,
Yeah, and decorations and
they buy some food, and so they go into Doc's house, which is never locked, and they start decorating the place, and they bring in the whiskey, they bring in the wine, they bring in the food, and they end up drinking the whiskey, drinking the wine, eating the food.
People
wrecking
come
the
over
place, knocking things over.
Right, they get into fights, they knock stuff over, they ruin his phonograph, they break some of his
records.
best records.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, what is it? $300 worth of damage.
$300 worth of laboratory glass.
Yes.
So that the beakers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So they make a complete mess of the place, and Doc hasn't come home yet from La Jolla. Where did he go?
La Jolla.
Yeah. So when he finally comes home, his front door is out of whack, windows are broken, the place is a wreck, and he's all upset, and he takes it out on Mack. Which is the one time that we see Doc actually showing a little bit of a temper.
Yeah. And then, Mack feels terrible and promises to pay him back, and Doc doesn't want to hear it.
Yeah, it's like you're
Oh,
never going to pay me
I know.
back.
Mack, you and I both know you're not going to pay me back. Now, come on.
Right. So instead of letting Mack just stew about it and stress about it, knowing he's not going to pay him back, he just figured, well, maybe that sock on the jaw would be...
Right.
Yeah, he punched him 3 times and knocked out a couple of his teeth or something like that.
Wait, and Mack goes, Mack, you and I both know you're not going to pay us back, and I know that you're going to be fretting about it, so stop thinking about it and stop worrying about it. So at that point, you start seeing Doc really caring for everybody else.
Yes, of course. Now, it sort of seems like we've, climaxed and resolved, but Mack and the boys aren't done.
No.
They still feel...
How do you get over a bad party? A good party.
Well, the thing too is during the deer, Steinbeck writes about how sort of the gray cloud rolled into Monterey and everybody was feeling awful, and Mrs. Talbot had a party for the cats and one of them didn't show up, and everybody was crying, and then all of a sudden something breaks them out and they come up with inspiration, and that's when they think about having another party.
And so
but
this
we're going
time-
to do it different this time.
This time, there's a couple things to
Well, I tell you what, I got a great quote.
They kept referring to Doc's party. Well, Doc was never there.
Yes.
Remember at Doc's party? You mean the party where Doc wasn't there?
We're at his house where we ruined his house, and he wasn't even there. So the next party is going to be a birthday party.
All right, this we're going to get it right, and we're going to do it different.
All right,
What's
and
your quote?
Mack was realistic about it. Last time we forced her, he was talking about the party.
Yeah.
He told the boys, "You can never give a good party that way. You got to let her creep in on you."
Yeah.
So they want to find out when Doc's birthday is, and of course these guys are natural-born schemers. Nothing is straightforward.
Yeah.
They've always got an angle. They've always got a way to find something out. So Mack goes to Doc and says, "You know, Hazel and some of the boys are getting into astrology, where you can interpret
You can tell a lot about a man if
by
you
his
just know his
birthday." Yeah, and so, well, you know, what's your birthday? And he wheedles out, and Doc, who knows that there's something questionable about this, gives him a pretend birthday.
Yes.
So,
Oh,
but it doesn't really matter.
And he kind of
because
knows something's up.
he knows something's up. But also, it really doesn't matter because all they needed was a date to have the party.
Yes.
So they've got a
And it-
date now.
So we're going to skip the decorations.
And they start going around town and telling everybody, you know, here's the big secret. We're going to have a birthday party for Doc on such and so date. And this time, they want to have presents.
Right.
Right. So they start telling everybody, you know, be ready, prepare for the big day. And there were some interesting presents that came out of this. The girls in the whorehouse made him a quilt.
Yeah. Out of portions of
Of their
Lingerie.
underpants.
yeah.
Yeah, and then another character we haven't talked about finds a rare part from a car and polishes it up and gives it to
Yeah,
him
right,
as like
yeah.
an antique.
it's
Right.
probably one of three in the whole world.
Yeah, a crankshaft of a car they didn't make anymore.
Right.
Yes.
And Andre the painter does his
Henry.
push pin. Henry,
yeah.
right? Andre. Henry.
Okay.
Henry.
Oh,
I was trying to be French on it.
Oh, that's Frenchy.
But so Henry the painter, he has the push pin. He's trying to bring back the push pin art form.
Yeah, I want to talk about Henry later because he's one of my favorites. Right. So,
This time they actually do a decent job planning the party.
but of course, Doc also gets wind of it, and he has such low expectations that he buys a bunch of booze and steaks and food. Basically supplies his own party.
He knows they're going to screw it up.
He knows they're going to screw it
And he
up.
takes his good records and he locks them up and he locks up the
Anything breakable.
important-
He puts
anything
it,
breakable.
He hides it away somewhere. So they have the party, and it's kind of an interesting party because there are parts of it that are relatively subdued. Where he's
Yeah, and
reading
the
poetry.
the whores are coming over in shifts.
Yes.
Right. So you have your work hours, and then you have your party hours.
Yeah, Dora made sure that it was that the bear flag was still always
And
open.
then, unfortunately, on that same night, a ship comes in. A bunch of horny sailors come out looking for the whorehouse,
And they see a party on the hill, and they're going.
and they think Doc's house is the whorehouse. So they come in and cause a big ruckus and starts a big fight.
That's right, big fight, which
Everybody loves, but
Yeah.
everybody loved, because they're like parties are something that haven't been studied enough, which is kind of interesting. I'm like, yeah, what exactly are the qualities of a good party?
You know, it reminds
And
me
there's
of that-
always there's ebb and flow, and there right, and then there's peaks and valleys, and
Yeah.
this. He was sort of sociologically analyzing what it takes to make a party, recognized this lull, was glad to have the fights.
Yeah.
And then the boys came back later. And
This
were
kind
invited.
of ties in with some other things that we've been talking about. That testosterone levels have been dropping precipitously in men for a long time. And in the old days, it seems like a good fight was part of a good party.
It does seem that way.
It's like they expected there'd be too much drinking, there'd be some wildness, and there'd be a fight.
Yeah,
There-
and
there's-
what
there's that-
Western movie is worth its salt without a bar scene?
Without a fight. Yeah.
there's that old Irish saying, "Excuse me, sir, is this a private fight or can anybody join?"
There you go. Yeah. So men just, when they get a little liquor in them, they want to fight, and that's what happens here.
And I don't know how it is now. And after a clean fight, winners and losers can shake hands and have a drink together.
Exactly.
That's
yeah,
right.
and that's what happens.
Yeah.
And they all kind of hide from the police, and the police go away. Everything's fine. And Doc's house is basically as wrecked with this party as it was from
The door was
first
back
party.
off the hinge again. Yeah.
But this time he got to participate in it, so it was a little more.
Doc enjoyed the fight scenes.
That's right. He had his shirt ripped, and had
Yeah.
some.
And so it just kind of, then you have the gopher scene, which I want to talk about.
Right.
And then it just sort of wraps up with him,
Yeah.
reading a poem and doing the dishes. And,
So right, so the denouement's very just subdued. It's
very
like
quick, and then the book's over.
It's like a day after a party and you have a hangover. That's how it sort
it's
of
like, all right.
ends.
Yep. Yep, very much
And,
so.
yeah.
The gopher is important. We should talk about that. But there are some other little themes that got
Right.
woven. That
So
we
how about
missed.
so the general tone, though, I find there's no knee-slapping humor,
Yeah.
but I'm reading the whole thing with a half grin.
Yeah. Yeah.
That there is a combination of realism and romanticism in a Mark Twainian kind of way.
And just the cleverness of the people and the humor of their interactions and like people trying to pull one over on Doc and him knowing it and just their sort of predictable roguish behavior was kind of amusing.
And to take it maybe a step higher, there is sort of that combination, that mixing of good and bad and right and wrong,
Yeah.
and where is the virtue, where is the sin, where is this, where is that, and he's pretty much saying, in Cannery Row, that everybody's a saint and sinner, and every place is heaven and hell, and every place is the thing. And
Well, before you move
all
on,
right, go ahead and quote it.
Here it is in the end of the first paragraph. Its inhabitants are, as the man once said, whores, pimps, gamblers, and sons of bitches, by which he meant everybody. Had the man looked through another peephole, he might have said saints and angels, and martyrs and holy men, and he would have meant the same thing.
It's
Right.
interesting.
So that really sets up.
Yeah.
This is the 2.5 pages before the story starts. It's that Cannery Row is a poem.
Yeah. How often do we get that theme of the gold-hearted whore and
Right.
all that sort of thing, where you have this combination of the saint and sinner in the same character?
Right. You could be right. So with that, it's clearly a romanticization of these circumstances,
Yeah.
right? Hobos living on the edge in the 30s can't all be right. It's not him saying this is what life was like,
Yeah.
right? It's more. Can you imagine going to some Oakland homeless encampment for a year and then leaving there and writing tales of good-hearted ne'er-do-wells?
Yeah.
Right?
Right, but if you did that, and Steinbeck did that, you would come out with small stories of good actions and good virtues.
That you could work
So
into something
right.
else,
So
yeah.
all right. So that's so what I'm asking is, was it closer to that because it's not meth-fueled mental illness,
Yeah, could be.
violence that you would see in was it actually more like that, or is he just romanticizing the time?
Well,
And so, like you're saying, selecting out the good-heartedness.
let's step back and think about when this was written, 1945. You got a war that started, in 1941 for America. And 1929, you got the Depression, and in Depression, everybody, well, I won't say everybody, but many people go on their hands and knees, and it's day-by-day existence. And that day-by-day existence does what? It creates homeless people. It creates people like Mack and the boys. It creates
a very different attitude towards all kinds of aspects of life. Like the idea of like you're living for today and you're not really thinking too much about tomorrow because you really don't know what's going to happen.
But Grapes of Wrath is a more of a grim view of day to day. This doesn't seem
Right.
grim at all. This is actually quite delightful living day by day. In fact, these guys don't even want jobs.
That's why they're
full-time
saints and
jobs.
angels, right? That's why they're saints and angels, and maybe that's what Steinbeck wanted to sort of capture. And he was writing this,
Because he's he's in New York, looking back 15 years.
and he's depressed as hell because he has
he's in New York.
PSD from the World War II era, you know. So I think there's a lot of that going. But I think at the same time, I mean, it's very what it reminds me of, and this is what I think Lee Chong. And then there's a Chinaman. You remember the Chinaman
Yeah,
that
he's
just
such a
walks
weird
in and
character.
out?
He just kind of comes
Well-
in and out throughout the book. What is
The
he
kids
doing?
yell at him.
He's Lao Tzu. He's the Taoist. He's the guy that comes out there. Li Chong's a Confucius. So there is that tension between playing by the rules and being a part of society and finding your enjoyment in that, and being outside of society and finding your enjoyment in that. And I think that's sort of the tension that you go on there. And I think that tension is really shown with the captain. Now, my question to you guys is, you know, when they go to get the frogs,
Yeah.
and the captain comes on and he's got his shotgun and he's got his bitch, which is the dog, not a woman. You know, and he's like, "You're trespassing," and Mack and the boys talks him into taking them in there.
Right.
Who's the winner? Who gets more? Or it's a non-zero sum game because Mack and the boy gets the frogs, but the captain gets camaraderie.
He also
That
gets
he
his
hasn't
dog.
had.
His dog is better.
And he gets his dog.
He gets rid of the frogs. And he can't.
And he gets rid of the frog.
He's
So
tired of them.
everybody, the tide rises for everybody.
But, I mean, my main takeaway from that scene, and that's a good point that you raised about both of them get something out of that. But my main takeaway from that scene is just Mack's skill in talking his way out of anything.
Well, and
He's
you
a
know what I was trying to
schemer and a
find,
wheeler
and
dealer.
somebody says, you know what, Mack could have been president of the United States.
If he tried.
And then the other
But,
guy,
but where would be the what would be the fun in that?
right?
Right. So these are
Right.
in a Lao Tzu kind of way. These are people who would trade peace of mind and camaraderie for fame and power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting scene, that whole thing. But I think there are some other scenes, other characters that we didn't really
All kinds of side characters.
Yeah. So Ed, who's one of the boys who lives in the Palace Flop House, we didn't talk about the grill, but that's a minor detail. Ed would work as a part-time bartender
Yes.
at the local establishment, and whenever somebody didn't finish a drink, he had a gallon jug with a filter on the top, and he'd pour the remnants of their whatever it was. Beer, wine, gin, vodka.
What do they call it? The winning jug or something like that. So at some point,
Wine, I think whining. I thought it was, but I'm not sure what they called it. But the idea was he would bring home this jug, which would be what the guys in the flop house would drink, and it would just be the leftovers from all these other kinds of things.
but what I kind of got from that was the sort of the living on the edge between what's right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So, like are you stealing? Well, you're not really stealing.
Because they didn't finish that drink. Anyway.
You're right.
I
So,
think
so. There's a lot of that going on, the ambiguity of right and wrong. I guess.
I think it's more than the ambiguity of right and wrong. I think it's questioning what is right and wrong. And, from a Western perspective, Western culture perspective, you have right and wrong. It's probably written in stone, the Ten Commandments were. But in the Eastern perspective, it wasn't written. It wasn't wrought in stone
I think
at
there's
all.
another
It
side
was
to it, which is just this is what life on the edge looks like. You're getting the leftovers. If you're on the street, you're eating the last bit of the sandwich the guy throws in the trash can, right?
Yeah.
And these guys, they're getting the last bit of the drink that the richer person didn't finish.
But it could. Go ahead.
I think the other thing too is like all these guys though try to do it society's way, and it never worked out, and now they're in there. But I do have what I think is the most important part of the book, where Doc says, "Look at them." He's talking about Mack and the boys. There are the true philosophers, I think. He went on, Mack and the boys know everything that has ever happened in the world and possibly everything that will happen. I think they survive in this particular world better than other people. In a time when people tear themselves to pieces with ambition and nervousness and covetousness, they are relaxed. All of our so-called successful men are sick with bad stomach and bad souls, but Mack and the boys are healthy and curiously clean. They do what they want. They can satisfy their appetites with calling them something else.
Yeah, and part of that is because there was no meth back then.
Yeah. Well, all right. So let me give you my heart of the novel, which is very close to yours. It always seems strange to me, said Doc. The things we admire in men, kindness and generosity, openness, honesty, understanding and feeling, are the concomitants of failure in our system. And those traits we detest, sharpness, greed, acquisitiveness, meanness, egotism, and self-interest, are the traits of success. And while we admire the quality of the first, they love the produce of the second. And I think that is really at the heart. That we recognize what we like most in people, but we admire the results of the meanness of the opposite.
Yep, that's true. So I got a question. How does the gopher fit in?
Fantastic, yeah. So there's what appears to be something close to a plot.
Yeah.
And then throughout there are 2-page, not even the long chapters are 5 pages.
Yeah.
You get 1 or 2-page stories that don't have anything to do with the plot.
They don't seem to, right?
But still have something to do with the Monterey situation.
Right.
So the very last of these is the gopher. Go ahead. Why don't you tell me how the gopher is?
The gopher is this young, healthy gopher, comes into town, finds the perfect spot.
Perfect.
Digs the perfect den.
Yes.
He's got everything right. It's like everything is
It's
going to
paradise.
survive. It's paradise for a gopher. He's got, it's going to survive the rain. He's got all the little things dug out. Everything's
He's figured out how the rain's going to come in.
Right.
Yeah.
He gets up and he starts singing his song to attract a mate, and nobody ever comes.
Right.
And then eventually he figures, I gotta go, find out what's going on. And he goes out and he finds like some other gopher is doing okay over there. And does he get beat up or something?
He gets torn up by
another gopher. So it's like, okay, he did all the right stuff. He did all the gopher 10 Commandments. Yeah. He built his house. He had everything right, and just didn't work out.
Right, but it's also because he built it in a very safe location, right? Where the chicks are is up there where the traps are.
Yeah. Okay.
I got it. Interesting point.
So you know what? To live life is, I guess
you got to be on the edge.
You get the safest route is you're not going to get the most out of life, and you're not gonna, and that's not where the chicks are. The chicks are where things might be a little sketchy, might be a little dangerous.
Well, I remember being 9 and 10 saying, "There's no way I'm going for those chicks, man." Man, Billy, you and I, we're going to be out here. We're going to be living out in the woods.
Yeah,
and we're
right.
gonna,
Just can't live on candy. And,
right. And
right.
And look at me. I've been married 30 years. And
that is an interesting point. I hadn't remembered that part about the traps.
Yes, they said the women are up there where the traps are. Like, well, all right. So is it about loneliness or is it about community?
It's about both, right? The book's about both, right?
Yeah.
And it's how it's how you create community.
Yeah. I think it's also, another great big theme is kindness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Because the Doc is incredibly kind, but Mack and the boys are also kind in their own way, and so are the whores. And
right.
There's a lot of kindness going on, where people who don't have everything are still don't have a lot,
Right.
are still like working together and trying to support each other.
Right.
But I think, and you're right, and sort of to support that is the fact is that when you're talking about Cannery Row, you are talking about the boom and bust.
Yeah.
You're talking about when the fish are swimming and you're catching sardines, man, you're making a lot of money. When there's no sardines to catch, there's nothing there. It's a bust. And you see these people going back and forth with that. And you see the craziness, and you see the crazies come out of it, right? Henry the Painter. Sam Malloy and his wife living in the boiler.
There's so many other interesting characters that we don't have time to cover. The guy building a boat who never wants to go out on the water.
Right, so he just keeps building it. He thinks his name is not Henri. He's not actually a painter, but he sees himself as a French painter. Now, so is it upbeat and optimistic, or
Yes.
is it a little bit? It is, and yet there are 3 suicides
Yes.
and 1 dead body
Yeah.
found trapped while Doc's trying to find an
Right,
octopus.
despite it's upbeat and optimistic.
Yeah.
Despite of everything.
Yeah.
Despite of that life is tragedy, is full of tragedy. There are moments where you can attach yourself to.
Right, but
joy
and so when
meaning
Doc
and
finds the body, he's just like he tells somebody else, and the guy's like,
There's a
you know,
prize
you can
for
get $30 for that, and
right.
it's just
Doc's like-
it's not that life is cheap, but life is hard, and you just can't be traumatized by it, I
Yeah.
suppose, or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. It's a novel well worth reading. I
It is.
thoroughly enjoyed
It's
it.
light, and it's light, and it's heavy, and it's
And there's a
fun.
sequel called Sweet Thursday
That's
that Steinbeck did. Tortilla Flat is probably the precursor to this,
Yes.
with different characters, but sort of the same sort of theme of people out there on the fringes of society, living and finding enjoyment and meaning in things.
Yeah.
All right, so if you're not quite ready to sink your teeth into Grapes of Wrath or East of Eden, I would say get
for
yourself a
Cannery Row.
little Cannery Row.
All right.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Remember to visit us at pigweedandcrowhill.com or send us an email at pigweedshow@gmail.com.